Welcome back to the Computer Consulting Show. Today, we're going to be talking about what does it take to succeed in sales, because technically, the sales techniques that we've been taught, at least I know when I first entered door-to-door sales back in, 2007, they're
Mm,
super outdated, and these are tactics that were taught in the 1960s, and these pressure tactics just simply don't work anymore. The fear of loss, the everybody's doing it, so you got to get into being super overly excited about your product. When you're smiling so hard, you're not even blinking. Yeah, that's turning people off. And people don't care about your features and your benefits, but what do they care about? And that's what I want us to talk about today, because the industry has shifted entirely, especially with COVID. So our
mm.
face-to-face interactions are limited, so we have to evolve. And today I'm going to be bringing on a very special guest who has a very scientific approach to selling that has been tested and proven to succeed in the modern day. He even wrote a book basically on how to sell to an unsellable generation. And that's really important, because you know what? At the end of the day, whether you're in business, whether you're looking to get employed, or even ask someone on a date, sales is a part of human evolution. So basically, who is this special guest? Well, he's been featured in Forbes and USA Today, Inc. Entrepreneur Magazine, Thrive Global, Yahoo Finance, Disrupt Magazine, and a host of other publications on the topic of sales and persuasion and the role of psychology and human behavior in the buying process. Just this year, his company, Seventh Level Communications, has been awarded one of the top 5,000 fastest growing companies in the States. And this scientific method of selling, created by him, has helped over 141,000 and counting salespeople in over 37 countries over the last 3 years to basically 5x and even 10x their sales results. And the seventh level of clients usually include Fortune 500 companies all the way to SMB companies, down to individuals selling basically anything. So, this particular brand of sales training pioneers the unique use of behavioral science and human psychology with the sales process, reflective of his deep studies at the Utah Valley University. So, this scientific method of selling has helped a lot of people in the world, and today I'd like to introduce you so he could help you. And during his 17-year sales career, he was actually recognized by the Direct Selling Association as the 45th highest earning producer out of more than 100 million salespeople selling anything worldwide. So basically, he was able to succeed multiple seven figures every year. And today, he's the chairman and founder of Seventh Level Communication, a global sales training company with its headquarters in Sydney, Australia. And in fact, I'm going to be bringing him on today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you, Jeremy Miner.
Hey, Yulia, thanks for having me. I apologize. I look like a red lobster. I was outside all day at my youngest son's football camp, and I did not stay in the shade. So I look like a red lobster today. You'll have to forgive me.
I'll look like a red lobster in about 4 hours. I'm going to go boating after this. So maybe
Nice.
we'll do another interview in the future. So we can both look like lobsters.
There you go.
Well, this is so cool to have you here. I remember I met you, has it been 5 years ago, and at a marketing conference in Hawaii, and I was just so
Yeah.
blown away by your knowledge and your skill set, and you were pretty cool too. And
Well, there you go. Yeah, I met you at an event, like a marketing conference event in Hawaii. I think it was in late 2017.
yeah,
And you and another friend of yours, I don't remember his name, came up to me and basically said, "Hey, can we interview you?" And I'm like, sure. And then we just like literally sat down like outside on a patio like 10 minutes later, and I'm like talking sales and stuff. That's kind of, I think I barely had started seventh level at that point. It was in the startup
really.
phase. Yeah.
Oh
Yep.
wow, that's cool. It was the very beginning of it.
The
So
very, very
you're my
beginning.
first round interview. So I'm sure we'll
First,
do fine in this one, hey?
yes, first round interview. It was a pleasure. I had a lot of fun when we talked, for sure.
Well, this time I didn't put you on the spot, and I did prepare some questions, so
Yeah.
maybe we can kind of get into it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Whatever your audience would like to know from me, I'm all game. I'm all
cool.
good.
Yeah, I mean, my audience are basically entrepreneurs, salespeople, people that have executive level positions in their companies that may be looking to scale. And
Okay.
obviously, the economy has shifted with the pandemic, and I would like to just give them some value on how we can pivot to continue succeeding, because money's still there. It's just moving in different directions, and we got to know how to position ourselves, right?
100%.
So yeah, maybe we can start. And why do you think it's important for someone to have the ability to sell in a competitive world?
Well, I think if you want to be competitive, because we all know that this is a very competitive world, it's the most competitive that it's ever been. So if you want to prosper in life, you have to learn how to move other people to your way of thinking. So what a lot of people don't understand is, we'll always get people that will message us on our Facebook ads or whatever. And they'll be like, well, I'm not really in sales. Like, how would this help me? But here's what we don't understand. Everyone watching here, everyone in the world, doesn't matter who you are, what you do, doesn't matter your age, you're all in selling. You're all in sales. Even if you don't get paid a commission, you're still out there. Think about it. You're still out there trying to persuade, you're trying to influence, you're trying to convince, and you're trying to move others. Let me give you a few examples of that. You said you got a lot of entrepreneurs on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to get your employees to follow the vision of where you want to take your company, what are you doing? You're trying to persuade, you're trying to influence, you're trying to do what we call move others. If you're an employee, right, trying to convince your boss to give you a pay raise, you're trying to persuade, influence, and convince and move others. If you're an attorney trying to convince a judge that your client is innocent, you're trying to persuade, you're trying to convince, you're trying to move others. If you're, everybody talks about politics all the time in every country. If you're a politician trying to get people to vote for you, you are trying to convince, you're trying to persuade, you're trying to move others. And it gets down to even personal stuff. If your grandmother, who you love and adore, gets cancer and you know of a treatment that could save her life, that might be outside standard chemo, for example, that has a low success rate, you're trying to persuade, convince, and move others. You see, everyone's in sales no matter what you do, whether you get paid for it or not, you're always trying to persuade and move others. So that's why I always say, if you want to be successful in life, you have to learn persuasion skills. Otherwise, you get left behind.
I completely agree. In fact, I applied this even in the scholarly world. I didn't think I was going to be an entrepreneur. I thought I was going to be a researcher. And a lot of people asking, well, Yulia, how did you get into Harvard? And honestly, I have to thank my sales skills, because I remember clearly I had a phone interview. It was for an internship. And instead of beating my chest and saying how great I am, which is probably what every other person is, because it was basically like a call all around the world for the top students, right? So it was very competitive. And I basically looked at their research and I proposed certain solutions to the questions they had in their hypothesis. And I asked, have you ever thought of approaching it this way? And then I guarantee you, they probably thought, oh, she might be pretty valuable.
You'd stand out, right? So they viewed you as more of an expert or an authority, rather than how they viewed everybody else applying as just somebody else that's just smart. And we've got thousands of smart people trying to get in here. Exactly. So everybody else was commoditized while you stood out. Even though some of those people might have had better grades, you just stood out better.
I'm telling you, when I got there, I felt like people were a lot smarter. I kind of had to catch up on learning statistics software that I've never used before, and I had to learn on the job, But I really have to say it was my ability to persuade that got me through the door.
Well, and here's one thing that most people might not connect the dots. And this is going to sound kind of weird, but when I was in college, I majored in behavioral science and human psychology, but my minor was in New Testament Christianity. I know that sounds weird, but I just love history. I love religious history. I just love like everything history wise. It doesn't matter to religion, to the pyramids of Egypt. I just love history, historical things. Okay. And so if you look in, if people on here are Christian or they read the Bible or whatever, if you look in the Bible, it talks about in the beginning of mankind, how there was a war in heaven, right? So there was this war in heaven, and, a third of the host of heaven followed Satan and his plan, and they were rejected by God and thrown to the earth, right? And then 2/3 of the host of heaven accepted God's plan. And there was this major war. And here's what we have to understand. Like, when you think of a war, was that war in heaven fought with guns? Was it fought with tanks? Were there swords or bullets involved? No. It was a war of persuasion. It was a war of ideas. It was a war of moving others to their way of thinking. So persuasion has been around since before this earth ever was even thought of, or any of us were ever here. Persuasion has always been there. It's an internal principle. Weird, huh?
Oh, very interesting. I mean, yeah, technically to recruit soldiers, you got to convince them of your idea and a cause that's bigger than themselves, right?
That's right. It's all about persuasion, 100%. All right, I'll move on from my wackiness. What do you got for me?
Okay, cool. Well, speaking of persuasion, I think people have, a mixed conception of what that might manifest into. So can we just discuss what are the biggest mistakes that sales people or entrepreneurs make when they're trying to sell something?
Well, there's a lot of mistakes, but let me give you one of the biggest ones. And I think you kind of hit the head of it when you first started, before you introduced me, you were talking a little bit about how selling has changed. And one of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs and salespeople make when they're trying to sell is they come across way too enthusiastic about their products and services and their solutions, especially way too early in that sales conversation, especially if you're selling one-on-one. Now, a lot of you guys are saying, well, what the hell, Jeremy? What are you talking about? I have to be excited about what I sell because I'm so passionate about my product and it helps so many people. And I totally agree with you. But you have to learn how to keep that excitement to yourself. You have to keep your excitement internal rather than external. Because if you come across too enthusiastic to your prospects, they view you as like having commission breath. Like you're just there. They're not in your shoes. They don't know what you know when you first start talking to them, okay? And one thing we have to realize, behavioral science is really clear on this. Within the first typically 8, 10, 12 seconds of every sales call you're on or sales interaction you're having, whether that's in person in a boardroom meeting, whether it's on, StreamYard or Zoom like we are now, whether it's, face-to-face, whether if it's on a phone call, it doesn't really matter. Your prospects are subconsciously picking up on social cues from you based on your verbal and non-verbal identity from your tonality and what you are saying and or asking that triggers their brain to react in one of two ways. The first way is if you don't know the right questions to ask, or if you come across, even in the first 12 seconds, as aggressive or needy or salesy, it triggers their brain to do what? To go into what we call fight or flight mode, okay? Where they want to get rid of you very quickly. And they say things like, I'm just too busy to talk right now. Can you call me back later? Or we don't need that. Or we already have that. Or we don't really have the money for that. Or how much is it going to cost? Or I'm good. I'm good. Or can you call me back in a week, a month, a year later? Does that ever happen to anybody listening? Okay. There's a reason why something you said triggered them to react that way. Okay. Now, the second way is if you understand human behavior, if you understand the right questions to ask with the right tonality, and we come across as non-biased and just neutral, like we're not quite sure if we can even help, it triggers their brain to become curious enough that they feel like they want to engage with this, that they want to open up to us, as you might have something very important to them. So when we get on calls or interactions, it doesn't matter. We have to come across detached in our mind from the expectations of making the sale. I'll explain what that means. and really focus on whether or not we can actually solve their problems, whether or not there's even a sale to be made in the first place. Now, do I mean that you should get on a call and not make a sale? Well, of course not. The business would never work if you weren't making sales. Your goal is to make a sale in every single call that you're on, but you have to keep that to yourself. The moment your prospects feel like you are trying to sell them and they feel like they're being sold is the moment that the wall comes up and they start shutting down. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I couldn't help but just think of a typical dating scenario. You know, if some guy or gal is approaching and they're like, "Hi, I'm so excited to meet you. Wait till I tell you how cool I am. I'm so interested in you." Like, you would be like, "Whoa, this guy probably never gets any dates. I'll pass, not today." Like,
yeah, I mean, he could be the best looking guy, could be like a freaking model, but because of the way he approaches you, it automatically triggers resistance. And the same is true in selling. It's the same thing. It's subconsciously wired in our minds as human beings.
Yeah, it's a evolutionary trait, right? We kind of want what we don't have, but we want to have intrigue. It makes perfect sense. So I think for me, if I think of a dating scenario, I'm like, okay, how am I coming off right now in business, right? Because I want to create intrigue. And I love what you say. It's like, well, let's see if I can even help you. I don't know. I'm not convinced that I could really offer what you need. And let's discover a little more. And it's so funny because in the branding agency that I work with, a lot of people call us right about like, I want a proposal. I kind of step back and I'm like, well, I need to know what you're looking for because I'm not sure I can help. You know, like I need to see what are we dealing here with here. So when you take that step back, we actually don't try to rush the sale. We take our time. And
well, how would you even know what to put in the proposal, right? Without knowing their situation. So it's almost like if somebody says, "Hey, can I just get a proposal? I don't have much time," and you haven't even talked to them for 2 minutes, you say, "Well, yeah, that's not a problem. I could possibly do that." Now, to be frank, I'm not quite sure we could even help you yet. It might make sense if we knew a little bit more about what you're doing in XYZ, repeat back whatever it is, just to see if we can help. And if that's the case, I can put something together that might be more useful for you. Would that help you? Oh, yeah, of course, because that makes sense, right?
Yeah. And your tone, like just notice how totally neutral and unbiased and underexcited you are, right? So that's
because I'm being truthful. I don't know if I can even help. I don't know anything about what's going on. Am I just going to throw something on a piece of paper and email it over and hope and pray something in there is going to stick and they're magically going to want to buy? I call that hopium. It's a drug that so many salespeople take.
So true. So true. Oh my God, this is such a good interview already. I'm so excited. No, I'm not excited. I'm very indifferent, actually.
You're very unbiased. There you go. No. I like it.
Cool. So actually, I wanted to ask you, I know you have a really unique methodology called NEPQ, which I'd love for you to put that down. Can you go over what that is and how is it different to other traditional sales techniques? Yeah,
sure. We're talking about a whole 180 turn there. So what I was explaining here, and I'm not going to go into my background because I'd probably bore everybody to death, but my major in college was behavioral science and human psychology, right? So neuroscience, study the brain, how human beings make decisions, and how and why people are persuaded to do something and or not persuaded. Okay. So check this out. According to behavioral science, there are 3 forms of communication. And for everybody that's listening, I'd probably write these down because once you understand, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So once you understand the differences in persuasion and where you are now compared to where your sales ability could be, it will completely change everything for you, your sales, your business, everything. So the first mode of communication, which is what we call ERA, so ERA 1, so ERA 1 type of sales, according to behavioral science, write this down, we are the least persuasive. So we're the least persuasive when we tell people things, or we attempt to dominate them, or posture them, or manipulate them, or push them into doing something we want them to do. Okay. Let me give you some thoughts on this. Think like boiler room selling. Has anybody ever watched like Wolf on Wall Street? I mean, it's a cool show. It's very unique. It's kind of cool to watch. But it's that type of selling. Hey, I've got a great opportunity for you. And then we talk about the features and benefits of what we do. And then we push and tell them why they need to buy or why they need to go with you. It's just like if you tell your spouse that they need to do something for you and then you push them to do it, what do they typically do back?
Push back.
They push back, right? That's just human behavior one-on-one. So let me give you a few examples of the least persuasive way to sell. Some of these might slap everybody in the face. Presenting. What? I've got to have a great presentation, right? So we've all been taught that you have to have a great presentation and you have to show them with your slide decks, 50-page slide decks, how great your services and products are. We've got the best this, we've got the best that, which, by the way, doesn't every salesperson and company say they have the best product or service?
Of course.
I mean,
so the number
let's
one
be real.
And we always joke, who's the number 2 real estate agent?
I know. I mean, let's be real. Like, how many salespeople say that their product or service is 5th best in the market? No one does. They all say they have the best or the best of this or the best that. It's just like if you ever watch like The Bachelor or Bachelorette, you know, those shows where the host comes on, the Chris, whatever his name is, and he's like, this season is going to be the most dramatic, craziest season you've ever heard. And I'm like, I think they say that every season. So it's like nobody believes it anymore, right? Because everybody says it, right? Yeah. So when your prospects, when you say things like these, we've got the best this, and it's going to be the best this, your prospects psychologically actually trust you less. When you say things like that, or you talk down about your competitors because they're used to every salesperson saying the same thing. Okay. So according to the data, it's not very persuasive if your presentation is more than 10% of your entire conversation. Think about that for a second. 10%. What about telling your story? I need to tell you this. Nobody cares about your story when you're selling one-on-one. Whose story do they care most about? They care about their story, right? That's what we want to develop. What about giving a sales pitch? We've all been taught you have to have a great pitch. But according to science, very low on the persuasive poll. If anybody ever watches that show on CNBC called Shark Tank, you know, where the young budding entrepreneurs come in and they pitch their products to, you know, Mark Cuban and Barbara and Damon John and all the sharks, Kevin O'Leary and all that stuff. You have to stop the pitch. Do you ever see the sharks' faces when the people go into their pitch? They're like, ugh, they're just like, oh my gosh, like it's a turnoff, right? Yeah. You have to ditch the pitch. In fact, in our company, we actually give out shirts to our clients. We mail them that have on the shirt, #ditch the pitch, just so they remember that. All right. What about putting sales pressure on them? Okay. Does anybody ever do that? And the big one is assuming the sale. According to the data, very low on the persuasive poll, especially if you're in a more of a complex selling environment that requires multiple calls or touches. So we all have to ask ourselves, how many of you on here right now are watching are using these techniques or were taught how to use them? Now, typically when we ask that question, most people raise their hand, like 95% of the room. Now, that's just the first form of communication. All right, let's talk about the second form. This is called Era 2 type of sales. It's called consultative selling. Okay. So we're more persuasive when we attempt to have a discussion. That's known as consultative selling. Came out in the late 80s with books like Spin Selling. It was by a professor where they taught you that you needed to ask logical-based questions to find out the needs of your clients. Wow, what a novel idea. I might want to ask a few questions. But what's the potential downfall of this approach when you only ask logical-based questions, which we call those surface level questions? Well, your prospect's going to do what? They're going to give you logical-based answers in return, just surface level answers. You don't know what's behind that. And do people buy on logic or emotion? Well, brain studies show it's 100% emotion. They just justify it with logic. Let me give you some examples of some consultative questions that you should never ask, okay? Because they're just going to trigger resistance because everybody hears them all the time, all right? They're outdated, they're surface. John, can you tell me a problem that's keeping you awake at night? Don't ask that question. Everybody asks it in corporate America. It's horrible. Can you tell me 2 problems you're having the most, Mr. Prospect? Or who besides you would be involved in this decision? Or Mary, what are you looking for in a solution? So once again, it's too surface level. You have to learn how to go far deeper if you ever want to pull out any emotion or feeling and create massive urgency for them to buy now, not later. Or what sort of budget do you have set aside for this? It's too surface, okay? Now, once again, even asking these questions are more persuasive than telling your story, putting sales pressure on them, assuming the sale. but you're still having to play the numbers game because very little emotion is brought out by simply asking logical based surface level questions. All right, let's go to the third mode of communication. We call that era 3 type of sales. So write this down. We're the most persuasive when we allow others to persuade themselves. Allow others to persuade themselves. And that's called dialogue. When we ask what we call neuro-emotional persuasion questions, that, like you said, stands for NEPQ. This is key. This is where we use certain questions and techniques that work with human behavior rather than against it. Okay, so the question is, it's the $1 million question, $10 million question, $100 million question. How do you allow others to persuade themselves? Do you just show up and give your prospects permission to persuade themselves? Like, hey, Yulia, go ahead, persuade yourself, make sure the check's written out for me. No, of course not. Okay. You have to learn specific skilled questions, when and how to ask them in a step-by-step structure that get your prospects to sell themselves rather than you trying to do it. So everybody on here has to ask, what type of salesperson are you? Are you the era 1, boiler room, push, 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 assume, present, 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 close, 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 resistance, resistance, resistance? Are you era 2, consultative, logical-based questions? Or are you era 3, getting your prospects to persuade themselves? Do you want me to show you what the data is on that?
Please.
I know, I'm boring everybody. So typically when we ask these questions at events, so we always keep track of who raises their hands, who doesn't, all that stuff. We have these forms that everybody fills out. The first mode of selling, push them, pitch them, assuming the sale, Wolf on Wall Street, boiler room selling, sell on the opportunity. That was primarily taught, like you said, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. 73% of all salespeople and companies are still selling this way. 73 freaking percent. That's a lot. And they wonder why sales stagnate. They wonder why their marketing dollars go way up and they have to play the numbers game. Now, era 2, asking consultative, logical-based questions, came out in the 80s and 90s with the books like Spin Selling. 26% that we survey are selling that way. The third mode, which according to behavioral science is the most persuasive way to sell, getting your prospects to persuade themselves, less than 1%. Now, why is that? Because behavioral science is primarily just theory. No one ever took the theory and actually developed questions around that, as far as we understand, until NEPQ came around. Okay. So here's the friction point that we have to understand. If you're still selling using era 1 and era 2 type of techniques that work against human behavior, that trigger sales resistance, but today's information age buyers are over here, okay, era 3 way of thinking. They don't want to be talked at and sold to. They want to be asked, heard, and understood. Does everybody see the friction of why you're not able to get your message across and why you're getting so many objections and rejection? It's not because they don't want to buy. It's just because of the way you're communicating them is causing them to run the other way. Now, luckily, all that can be fixed once somebody learns NEPQ.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, I remember when I was going through sales training, a lot of the focus was objection handling. And what you're saying is like, well, if you're doing this right, you won't have that many objections to begin with.
Yeah, you prevent objections from even happening in their mind, because objections, for the most part, most of them are actually triggered by what the salesperson says or questions they don't know how to ask. And so a lot of that, when you learn that, can be prevented. So I'm not saying you'll still never get any objections. You'll still get some. But let's say if you get your objections reduced by 60 to 75%, selling becomes a lot easier for you and a lot more profitable and far less headaches.
For sure. I mean, and even if you do successfully objection handle, you know, you might like force them into a corner to say what you want them to say. They might buy, but then they'll have buyer's remorse, which is not.
Then they cancel, or charge back or something.
Yeah. So the retention after that, is it really going to work? And I really love this approach because humans are emotional beings and we justify things logically later, right? So I love that approach. I think it's brilliant, and it's been
100%.
Very cool. Oh my gosh, I'm getting so absorbed into this. So one of the other questions that I had was, what are one of the biggest selling myths out there that many entrepreneurs believe? Maybe we overcovered it, but what do you think?
I mean, we kind of did, but I'll kind of give you a little twist on it. So I think It's because so many companies and business owners think that their products are so great, and I'm sure they are, that somehow because their product is just so superior and great, or their pricing so good, that people are just going to line up and buy it. We call that product pushing. Product pushing. Okay. You don't want to be a product pusher. Okay. So realize your prospects are even more cautious and skeptical about making the wrong buying decision or choices than they ever have been before. And why is that? Okay. Because in the age we live in today, we call that the information age, with the power of the internet and especially social media. Your prospects are being sold to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, month after month, year after year. And I want you to think about how that works. So you're like, no, I'm not being sold that to all the time. Oh, really? Yeah, you are. I want you to think about it. When you wake up in the morning, you get on your phone and you look at your Facebook, what do you see? You see ads trying to sell you something. You turn on your TV, you see commercials trying to sell you something. You get in the car and you turn on the radio. You hear radio ads trying to sell you something. You get home from work, you get back on social media, and your aunt is posting about her newest, greatest MLM she just joined and why you should join. You see, you're constantly being sold something all of the time. And because of that, human beings have put up like defensive mechanisms in their mind that as soon as they feel that somebody is trying to sell them something, they immediately put up this wall, like the Great Wall of China, and they try to resist you no matter what. But it's triggered by certain words you say and questions you don't know how to ask. So just a little bit of there. So what we have to do is we have to become what we call problem finders and problem solvers. We talked a little bit about that before, not product pushers. Now, what do I mean by that? First of all, let's do this. I think everybody should grab a pen. One of the first questions we ask at any event, whether it's live or virtual, is we want to ask people listening in, do your prospects have problems? Raise your hand if your prospect have problems. Everybody raises their hands, okay? Now, I want you to write down the 2 biggest problems that your prospects have. So if everybody grab a pen and piece of paper that's listening, write down your 2 biggest problems your prospects have. Okay, I'm not going to give you much time, but write it down or think about it for yourself. Now, also think about it in your mind. Does your solution, look at those 2 problems. Does your solution solve those 2 problems? Now, I'm assuming everybody's going to be like, yeah, my solution solves these 2 problems. That's why I have a product or service. No product or service was ever invented without solving a problem. That's why they're invented, right? So here's what I want you to think about. If your prospects have problems and your solution solves those, then what's the missing link? Why are they not buying from you? Here's what I'm going to suggest. It's what you are saying, and more importantly, not asking, that's triggering your prospects to run the other way. So once you change what you're saying, and more importantly, you learn the right questions to ask at the right time with the right tonality and delivery, all of that can change. You see, in our day and age, like I said, you have to be a problem finder. You have to really more focus on problem finding even more than problem solving. And what's the reason? Because if your prospects don't buy from you, you can't really solve their problems. So you have to be even better at problem finding. And that means asking the right questions at the right time that helps your prospects see and find problems in their mind that they didn't even know they had before you started talking. One thing we all have to realize is that most of your prospects don't know they even have a problem when they first talk to you. Even if they book on your calendar, even if they reach out to you, they don't really know about their real problems. Or maybe they know they have a problem, but they don't realize how bad the problem really is. Or through your questioning ability, you're able to help them see 2 or 3 or 4 other problems they didn't even know they had, right? Or maybe they didn't understand the consequences of what's going to happen if they don't solve their problems. Because if we can't help them find problems in their mind, it's impossible for them to ever feel any need or urgency to buy from us, right? Now, what are most salespeople trained to be? We call them product pushers, and it's really not their fault. It's usually the companies that train them. Okay. They're taught how to ask a few consultative questions to find out the needs of the client. Like we just talked about, what's 2 problems that's keeping you awake at night? Or what type of solution are you looking for? What's your budget for solving this? All surface level questions. And then they do what? They go right into their sales pitch, talking about their features and benefits of their product and service and how they have the best this and the best that. and then they wing it and they hope and pray. It's like taking a bucket of mud and like throwing it up against the wall, like hoping and praying something we're going to say is going to magically trigger that person to want to buy from us. And like I said, I call that hopium. It's a drug that so many salespeople and entrepreneurs on, where they hope and pray something they say is going to make somebody want to buy. And it's such an unpredictable and hard way to make a living. I'll give you an example of this. Okay. Even with the Fortune 100 company. Okay. So one of our first clients 3 years ago was Google AdWords. Okay. It was actually my first B2B client. Okay. We went straight to the top. All right. So we trained 4 of their divisions. Okay. And when we came into their offices in Tempe, Arizona, that's where their inbound AdWords team is at, their outbound AdWords team. And then they have a team there at that time that was selling like inbound leads for like contractors and plumbers and electricians, like helping them like advertise their businesses in local areas. It was a big new division they started. They had like 100 salespeople just selling that. So we came in, they had me listen to the calls before we even met or anything like that. And all they did was talk about their products and services, and they had the best this and the best that. And so I walked into the boardroom. There's like 10 of these people, very intimidating, because most of them were like far younger than me and had like advanced degrees from Stanford and Harvard and all this stuff. And I'm like, hey, I dropped out my senior year in college, but I do know one thing. I do understand human behavior. So anyways, we get in there and I said, okay, so walk me through it. Like if I'm a salesperson and you hire me today, what does my sales training look like? And they said, oh, well, it's great. We have this manual. They plop out this manual and we have you go to these classes where we teach you how, our AdWords campaigns work and the algorithm and all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh no, I apologize. I didn't mean like how to learn how the product works. I meant like sales training. And they're like, well, that is our sales training. And that's where I had this revelation. I'm like, okay, some people think that sales training is product training, but nothing could be further from the truth. Okay. And it wasn't until we kind of broke it down, their sales process, and how, even though they were Google AdWords, how so many people, when they first heard that call, were like, I'm not interested. We don't need it. We don't really have any money to market, because they're always trying to call people that had signed up for AdWords, but they weren't using it. Right. Now, we don't need it. We don't have the money to market. I don't know how to do it. And I'm like, there's a reason why this is triggered. It's not because they don't, you got a great, obviously the biggest brand in the world, but your biggest brand in the world doesn't necessarily resolve people's concerns. So until we learn these type of questions, people are going to resist you. Now, we taught them that sales structure. The next 90 days, guess what? 244% increase in sales and revenue in those 4 divisions. 244%. Okay. And that's for a company that's already doing billions a year. That's an example. All right. I'm boring everybody. Let's move on.
No, this is amazing. The first thing that comes to mind, I actually listened to one of your podcasts, and you were saying that a lot of sales reps, they rush to offer a solution, but how do you know that that solution is really for that person? And I always use the analogy, would you trust a doctor that prescribes you medicine without understanding what your symptoms are or your medical history?
Or what's caused the disease.
Exactly. So I love what you say about being a problem finder to decide, can you even solve their problems?
And that's what the best doctors do, right? They problem find and ask you more questions around the pain and how long it's been going on and what's caused it. If a doctor just came in, like you said, and your spine hurt really bad, right? Because I know you've talked about that before, and they're like, oh, your spine hurts? Yeah, take this. That should do the trick. You'd be like,
bringing pain meds. I'm like, but that doesn't solve the cause. You think I can seriously? I never went back to him again.
Exactly. No problem finding.
Yeah. No, I love that. Thank you. That was really, and congrats on your first client. That's super impressive. That's amazing.
It was very intimidating for sure.
I can imagine. Great. Yeah. So the next thing that I wanted to know is, what is the main reason why so many buying decisions stall in the marketplace right now? I know that you kind of covered, well, people are pitching features and benefits, and they're just so knowledgeable about the products. I mean, I guess that's just one part of it. Is there any other reasons why?
Yeah, I mean, buying decisions, the only reason why, okay, so buying decisions stall because they're triggered by what the salesperson's saying, like we talked about, right? Because your sales teams, you know, if you're a business owner on here, the reason why so many deals are stalling for is because your sales teams are using techniques that work against human behavior. So they're triggering that fear. And so that's causing the stalling, right? So here's one thing that we haven't talked about. All selling really is, if you really boil it down to, is change. It's about one thing only, and that's change. It's about how good you are at helping your prospect view in their mind that by changing their situation, that means paying for your product or service, that is far less riskier for them to do than doing nothing at all, staying in the status quo, their problems stay the same, and nothing ever changes for them, which is more risky, right? So whether they want something better or they're trying to get away from pain, it's all about change. Now, here's the problem, though. Human beings don't like change. That's the problem, even though they say they do. Okay. And why? Because it makes us feel unsettled and uncomfortable, especially when it's initiated, like you said, by salespeople who are very eager to pitch their products or services within 2 minutes of meeting a prospect. Okay. Human behavior shows that we value tradition, consistency, and even something that is familiar, even if we don't like it that much, over something that is new and foreign to us. Think about all the bad relationships out there. Consistency, tradition, and familiar, even though we might not like it, over something that is new and foreign to us, right? Are we all right? Yeah, all right. So realize what we have to understand is that we're not selling the thing. You're not selling your products or services. You're selling the results of that thing. You're selling the results of that thing. If you're a real estate agent, you're not selling them a home. You're selling them the results of that home. Maybe they need more space for their kids. That's what you're selling. Maybe they want to get in a more prestigious neighborhood, so they want to have a feeling of success. That's what you're selling. Maybe they want to get out of a bad neighborhood because there's a lot of crime. That's what you're selling. You're not selling the thing. You're selling the results of that thing. So a couple of good questions that you want to ask that kind of trigger in your mind your prospects not to stall, or what we call consequence questions. Okay, consequence questions help your prospect see the consequences and the ramifications of what will happen if they don't do anything about solving this problem. Okay, so I might say, and I'm just going to give you generic versions because I know there's probably people on here that are in many different industries. But okay, but John, hold on. What if you don't do anything about this though, and then you repeat back their problem? Okay. Let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say that if you sell, because I was just working on a new client of ours who does like lead generation services for just companies. Like they're an agency, does Facebook ads, YouTube ads, all this stuff. So we're running out their sales structure for their salespeople. Okay. So their prospects, their problems are they're just not getting high quality lead. So their sales are stagnating. So a good consequence question, the way to wrap it into that is I might say, and this is not in the beginning of the conversation, this is more towards the end. Okay. Okay. But John, hold on. What if you don't do anything about this though, and you keep getting these lower quality leads to your sales team, and your sales keep stagnating another 3, 6, or even 12 months from now? Now, what does that question cause him to think about? Stagnating sales another 3, 6, or 12 months. And if he doesn't do anything, what's going to happen 12 months from now? The same thing. So that triggers more urgency for him to fight, almost defend his position on why he needs to change that now. Okay. So, or I could ask another way. Well, okay, but what are some possible ramifications if your company doesn't do anything about this? That gets them to think of the consequences or ramifications if they don't get the problem solved. So consequence questions are the key to getting your prospects to not stall and to build urgency in their mind that they need to do something about this now, not later.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if you look at mankind, when we first evolved, we are wired to avoid danger, right? If you see a lion, you run, and only then are you motivated to change. You're always trying to move towards pleasure and avoid dangerous situations. So we're like kind of playing on that primitive part of brain that's been around for thousands of years.
Probably millions of years. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. It's completely it really clicks because people, even though they know like there could be a benefit from making that change, if they're comfortable, people are not going to really make that change. It's got to get to a point where it's like bad enough. You got to heighten the pain for them.
Yeah, and we can only do that not by telling them,
Yeah.
but by asking them questions that get them to realize how bad it's going to get if they don't do anything. That's the key.
Yeah, I love that you actually look into getting them to tell you what the impact of not making the change is going to be. And I think that's how they basically.
Yeah, because which is more persuasive, me telling them why they should change or them telling themselves why they need to change?
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, this is so good. So good. And you actually kind of already asked or already answered the question I had, like, what are some examples? And I thought the consequence one really hit the nail in the coffin there. So you talked about preventing objections versus overcoming them. I think we just briefly touched on that. Do you want to elaborate on that anymore?
Yeah, well, I'll just give you a few examples, since we've already talked a little bit about it. But if, there's certain words you use in your sales conversations that just trigger objections.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is sign and contract. Now, that might kind of sound weird to somebody like, well, they're just signing a contract. But if I say, okay, go ahead and sign the contract here, sign and contract are typically two words that trigger sales resistance because A, no one wants to sign a contract that locks them into doing something they might not want to do or regret later. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if I change the wording to, just go ahead and authorize the agreement. Mm-hmm. Well, that means the same thing, but it's far more neutral. So instead of saying sign the contract, authorize the agreement. Wow. See the difference in how that sounds? Everyone's okay with authorizing an agreement so they can get what they want. But people don't like to sign contracts, even though it's the same thing. See what I mean? Yeah. The government, it's scary. Governments do a great job at this, at their wording. Okay, take a look at the IRS here in the United States. That stands for Internal Revenue Service. If that was called Internal Taxing Service, which that's what it is, it means the same thing, but everybody would be up in arms because nobody wants to be taxed, but revenue is a far more neutral term. Mm-hmm. Governments do a really good job with that. I don't know if that's good or not, but they do a really good job with that neutral terms, okay? Yeah. So if we hear certain things in the conversations that are signs to you that they're possibly going to have an objection about, when you go through your presentation and at the end you need to ask certain questions to seed in their mind and eliminate. So you might hear something in that conversation and you're like, they're going to have that same objection for me if I don't resolve that now. So a lot of salespeople just kind of like sweep it underneath the rug, hoping it doesn't come back up. But 95% of the time it does come back up, right? So let's say, I'll give you an example. So we were just training a company earlier this morning that's in the high ticket industry. And let's say, and they sell like programs that teach, training programs that teach business owners how to scale their companies, okay? And let's say the prospect they're talking to halfway through says, well, this sounds good, but let's just say this halfway through the conversation, like, well, I've tried several different programs that just haven't worked out for me. Well, now you know that they still have that fear in their mind because they just brought it up. So when you drop the price at the end about your services, do we still think that fear is going to be there? Probably, right? So I want to help them overcome that right then and there, but I want to help them in their subconscious. I don't want to address it like right in their face. So I might say like this, okay, but help me understand. When you say it didn't work for you, what programs were you in? Just so I understand. Oh, I took this and I took that. Okay, now that helps me understand better. Oh, okay, they're in that. Gives me more of a snapshot. And I'm going to say, okay, what parts of their training program do you feel didn't work for you? And then they tell me like this part didn't work and that part worked. And then I might say, because let's say if I know who they took and I know it's a legitimate program that other people are having success, I might say, now, were there other people in that program getting results? Wow. You know what everybody says? Yeah, I mean, they for sure. There was other people that I heard having results or I saw testimonials. Okay, so if other people were getting results, what do you feel held you back from having the same type of success? And do you know what most people say? Well, I just didn't put the time into it. I just didn't study it enough. And they typically will take responsibility themselves. It's just like what Tony Robbins does at an event when he goes out on stage, when he gets off the stage and he goes out and talks to one person about their problems. And 20 minutes later, they're crying because he gives them empowerment to realize that they themselves have the power to change their situation. and they never realized they did before. They always felt like they were a victim. Okay. He asked a few questions that helped them realize that in their mind. He empowered them to think of that. It's the same thing in selling. So with that case, we're helping them empower them in their mind that maybe it wasn't the program's fault. Maybe it was their fault. Okay. Or maybe if it was a bad program and they felt like there was no support, and you know that in those programs, they don't get any support. I might simply say, okay, so the having the support's important to you then. What does that imply when I say that?
You offer the support.
That well, of course we have support. But if I said it like this, oh, well, that's not going to happen with our program. We have the most amazing support. That goes in one ear, out the other, because every salesman has also told him that. But if I said, okay, so having the support's important to you then, it just subconsciously feeds their mind that, of course, you have support. That's the difference. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. So to summarize, one, you have to be aware of the trigger words that create the objections in the first place, and rephrasing in a softer way. And two, if you understand their fears, you can, one, help them discover their responsibility for the lack of results and turn that into empowerment. Or two, you could implicitly imply that they're going to have what they didn't have there here. So I think it's just brilliant.
100%.
And if they're not major, really difficult tweaks to make in your conversation, right?
Yeah.
They're very minor and they can have really big impact. So
selling's easy. You just have to learn the right questions to ask with the right tonality. Nobody's born out of your mother's womb like just knowing how to sell. Selling's learnable because you're learning questions and you're learning how to work with human behavior. You're learning how to listen and you're learning how to interject at the right times and you're learning tonality. Nobody is born with those skills. Those are just all learnable skills.
would you consider that as part of like being the difference between persuasion and pressure, like helping them discover responsibility?
Well, yeah, because we know pressure is not very persuasive.
Yeah.
That's the problem. You have to play the numbers game, right? You'll get 1 out of 50 when you could get, 35 out of 50 if you knew how to persuade. Pressure is not persuasion. It's lazy selling.
Yeah, there's a key difference, and it makes a big.
Well, actually, it's not lazy selling. It's very hard-working selling. It just doesn't give you very good results.
It's ignorant selling.
That's true.
Oh gosh, very cool. Well, I think I'd like to wrap up this conversation about talking about what's happening today. We cannot ignore there's a major pandemic worldwide.
Yeah.
How has selling shifted in this time? Like, what have you noticed in the last year?
Well, your prospects have become even more skeptical, even more cautious to making buying decisions just because they don't know what's going to happen next week, next month, next year. Nobody knows, right? When we first had the lockdowns here in the United States, what was it, 15, 16 months ago? I remember sitting there telling my team, like, oh, yeah, I'm sure this will be like 2, 3, 4 weeks. It's no problem. And here we are, 16 months later, and now still half the country's locked down, or they'll be open for a month, closed for 2 months. It's just nobody knows what the hell's going on still, right? I would have never thought that. So your prospects are in that same boat. They don't know if they're going to be around tomorrow. Okay. So you have to learn these type of skills. Otherwise you just get left behind in the wastebasket. Like just people who have these skills just leave you in the dust. It's like cliche, but it's just the truth. So I would say one thing that's really changed, obviously logistic wise, is it's caused companies to think a lot differently how they use their salespeople. I'll give you an example. Like one of our clients in Canada, your neck of the woods, they're based out of Ontario though. So east side of Canada, like you're over there in the West. I think you're in like a completely different country, but they're over on the east side. They're one of the biggest auto dealerships in your whole country. They're called 401 Auto. I don't know if they're big out where you're at, but they're huge in Eastern Canada. They have like 40 some dealerships. Okay. And right now they're buying up all these other little ones that are going out of business because business was so bad during the lockdowns. But I remember we brought them on about 5 weeks before COVID. Perfect timing, right? Because once COVID happened, everything was locked down and you couldn't even go into a car dealership to buy a car. Like you couldn't go into retail. So what the hell are we going to do? So I remember them getting on, like completely freaked out. Nobody knows what's going on. And then we taught them how to move their salespeople like to their homes, have them start calling leads. We wrote out a sales structure on how to do that, what questions to ask. And then they would have the rep when they made a sale over the phone or over Zoom. So not in person, but over Zoom or the phone, then meet that customer outside of the dealership and then they would do the transaction and buy the car. Their sales during the lockdowns went up over 100% during COVID. And they're telling me now, like, hey, once the lockdowns end and like people like are really coming in and stuff, we think we're going to be up over 300% in 2022. But that's just because they shifted. You have to shift when things happen like that. Okay. Another example, like an insurance company that we brought on a little bit before the pandemic freaked out too, because insurance reps are always taught you got to go in the home. It's got to be face to face. They have to trust you. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? They were just like zoned out, this company. And we taught them like, it's actually a lot easier to make sales over Zoom, because now instead of your salespeople driving 30 minutes here, 30 minutes over here, 45 minutes here, and they can only see 4 or 5 people that day, well, now we can have them back to back to back to back to back Zoom appointments. And now they have 12 appointments a day, and we doubled their conversions, and they were seeing triple the amount of clients. Sales go up by over 300%. And now the same insurance company are like, we're never going back in the home. We're always going to do it on Zoom now. So it's caused people to like get uncomfortable a little bit. But when you get uncomfortable, you now step outside your comfort zone and realize that there's much bigger possibilities out there.
I love that. You know, and it's so true. Even with our clients, we've noticed that people that pivoted and positioned themselves online, we had a restaurant that was going under a rebrand, and during COVID, they actually had more sales than they ever did. I think they like 3x their revenue. They hit like a record. Just because they positioned themselves for people to purchase online. So it's actually becoming more convenient for people to spend. You know, yes, people are more resistant, but if you have the right tactics in place, you know, at the end of the day, people are sitting on their laptops or at home, you know, they want to be entertained. So if you are positioned online to capture that interest, it's the way to go. So.
It's so true. Well, Yuli, I appreciate you letting me be on here. That was an awesome interview. It was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, so much fun. I hope you get to do more of these in the future. I actually put your link below here so people can learn more about you. I believe you also have a Facebook group. So
yeah, and I would so I emailed you. I think I emailed you our Facebook group. That's probably going to be the best way if somebody wants to really learn about our company and what we do. I emailed it to your Evolve email or something.
Perfect.
So they can go to our Facebook group. It's called Sales Revolution. So just go to Sales Revolution. Once you click join the, I think it's like join the revolution, because we are in a revolution, right? For salespeople. When you click on that, there's going to be like a 3-question survey where we ask basic questions like what your industry is. It just kind of keeps tab of like what type of industries are in our group, kind of what you're looking for. And once somebody in my company administrator lets you in the Facebook group, they will tag you. Okay. And they will message you over. So check your Facebook messages. They'll message over to you a free training about objection prevention. It's about a 40-minute training, a little bit of what we talked about with more examples on how to prevent objections from even happening. We give that to you for free. Myself, our CEO, a lot of our sales trainers go live in the Facebook group about 5 to 6 times a week with different Q&A sessions, different trainings. We give you like little nibbles of our content that you can see what's going on. So your people are welcome to join our Facebook group, Sales Revolution. Started about 6 months ago, got about 9,000 people in there so far. It's growing pretty rapidly.
Yeah, I'm actually in that Facebook group myself, and I'm.
Oh, you are? Okay, there you go.
Cool. I'm just waiting to go through that training, so that's going to be my weekend fun.
Awesome.
What I'll do is I'll drop the link to the Facebook group just below in the comments so people can easily access it. So
sure.
Yeah, it's going to be super cool. And thank you so much for your time today. Like, this was pure gold, and I can't wait to see what you do more in the future. I'm sure you're going to just keep scaling up and helping others along with you to go to the top. So yeah, I really appreciate your time. If you're watching this, I'm going to be posting videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday. So feel free to stay connected with us, because I'll bring on, I don't know if I can bring on as cool people as you, Jeremy, but this is
well, you know, I have a whole makeup team that comes in here in the office and just puts a bunch of cool makeup on, you know, that.
Take some credit, okay?
Joking. Yuli, it was a pleasure. Thanks for being on. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you. We'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Take care for now.
Thanks.